Imagine a world right on the brink, a huge, untamed landscape, but you can feel this tightening grip of a new age coming. You can almost, smell the gun smoke, hear a coyote way off in the distance, maybe the jingle of spurs as riders vanish into this fading sunset. But this isn't just some romantic vision of the past, right? It's a world dealing with massive, irreversible change. The Wild West, well, the Wild West as people imagine it, is basically bleeding out. Lawmen are closing ranks, civilization is pushing in, and there's this band of outlaws making one last desperate stand. We're talking about a story that you don't just play. You feel like you live it. Today, we're diving deep into an absolutely monumental piece of interactive storytelling, Rockstar Games' 2018 epic Red Dead Redemption 2. And this isn't, simply a game. It feels more like a meticulously crafted historical fiction, maybe a social commentary, and for a lot of people, a really deeply personal journey. Loyalty, betrayal, freedom. It's all in there.
It absolutely is. And our sources today, they give us a really comprehensive look at Red Dead Redemption 2. I mean, everything from its super ambitious development, its critical reception, which was, well, almost universally acclaimed, all the way to its really nuanced story and the huge cultural ripples it's still making today. We've looked at critical analyses, sales figures, discussions about the tough parts of its development, even surprising influence in academia. It's a huge landscape of information, honestly, a lot like the game world itself.
So our mission today is to really unpack how Red Dead Redemption 2 manages to create such intense curiosity in the player, how it builds this incredible tension, raises the stakes higher and higher in ways few other stories manage, and ultimately how it sparks these really meaningful conversations about morality, about freedom, about, the end of a whole way of life. We want to get at not just what makes this world feel so alive, but why the character struggles feel so personal, so real, that they make us, the players, think about our own choices.
It's exactly. We're going beyond just what makes it impactful to explore why it resonates so deeply with so many people. We'll draw connections between this incredibly rich fictional world and the very real discussions it sparked. Things like player ethics, how history is represented, even crucial topics like labor practices in the games industry. It's a game that doesn't just entertain, it actively prompts you to think. And that's a pretty powerful thing for any medium to achieve, isn't it?
Definitely. So let's start by setting the stage. The year is 1899. And like you said, that's not just a date on a calendar, it's a statement. It immediately signals we're stepping into a world that's changing massively and irreversibly. It tells you right off the bat that the wild part of the Wild West is being actively tamed, broken in. And our characters, well, they're the last remnants, almost anachronisms, of that untamed spirit just desperately clinging to a life that's fading fast. The whole premise builds this immediate sort of overarching tension.
Right. And choosing 1899 specifically, what's fascinating is the historical significance. The tail end of the 19th century in the U.S., that was a really pivotal moment. You had the official closing of the American frontier, rapid industrialization changing everything, the federal government tightening its grip with law and order, and just the relentless rise of organized society. So by dropping the Vanderlyn gang right into this specific time, Rockstar instantly creates this core narrative tension. Can these outlaws actually survive, let alone, thrive, in a world that just doesn't want them anymore? A world that's actively hunting them down with more and more efficiency. And this feeling of impending doom, it's amplified because we know Red Dead Redemption 2 is a prequel to the 2010 game. It sets up the tragic context for what happens to John Marston later. Even the epilogue in RDR2, which jumps forward to 1907, really hammers home the finality of that transition, shows the ultimate decline of that outlaw era.
And the game world itself does such a brilliant job showing this visually. It's incredibly diverse, incredibly detailed. You travel through these huge fictionalized American states, New Hanover, Amberino, Lemoyne, West Elizabeth, New Austin, and each one feels distinct, right? They're like these carefully crafted reflections of different American landscapes from that time. You've got the sparse, rugged mountain wilderness of Amberino, those harsh peaks, the isolated Wapiti Indian reservation, and then that contrasts so sharply with New Hanover, which has rolling plains, dense forests, and rough towns like Valentine. Then you drift south into Lemoyne, which feels very much like the American Deep South, steamy bayous, old plantations, and these bustling cities like Saint Denis, which is clearly meant to be like a rapidly industrializing New Orleans, right? Cobblestone streets, electric lights, you see the social layers.
Absolutely. And that contrast you mentioned between the wild and the civilized, it's a fantastic storytelling tool. It constantly reinforces that central conflict. And if you played the first Red Dead Redemption, you'll notice little details, like New Austin and West Elizabeth, which were major areas in the first game. Well, here in RDR2's 1899, they look earlier, less developed. Blackwater, for instance, is a big port town in the first game, but here it's still heavily under construction. Shows that expansion. Armadillo, which was a busy hub later, is practically a ghost town now because of a cholera outbreak. Tumbleweed's already declining, hit hard by bandits. These details, they might seem small, but they powerfully underscore the story's main tension. This world is changing incredibly fast, and the outlaws are just being left behind. They have to adapt or, well, face extinction.
Which brings us right to the heart of it all, the Van der Linde gang. And like you said, it's not just a bunch of criminals thrown together. It feels like a chosen family, bound together by these shared ideals of freedom, maybe, and just a desperate need to survive. And leading them is Dutch Van der Linde. He's charismatic, he's articulate, but increasingly unstable, maybe. An anarchist railing against modern civilization. He paints this really compelling picture, this vision, but you start to see the cracks pretty early on, especially under pressure.
And this chosen family, it's filled with really complex characters. You've got Arthur Morgan, our protagonist. He's Dutch's main enforcer, been with the gang a long time. His loyalty is fierce, but you see him start to question things. Then there's Hosea Matthews, Dutch's oldest friend, kind of a co-leader. He's the strategist, the voice of reason, the moral compass, often offering a more measured view than Dutch. And you've got familiar faces too, like a younger, maybe less cynical John Marston, his tough partner Abigail Roberts, and their young son Jack. Jack's future becomes this huge motivation, doesn't it, for both Arthur and John. And then the rest of the gang. The lazy but somehow charming uncle, the impulsive Bill Williamson, the fiery Sean McGuire, the loyal Javier Escuela, and oh, the sinister Micah Bell. Can't forget him. Plus, compelling new characters like Charles Smith, who's this quiet, skilled hunter of Black and Native American descent, and Sadie Adler, who goes through this incredible transformation from grieving widow to fierce gunslinger seeking revenge. The writers really did focus on giving each character their own story, exploring life before the gang, why they stuck around. It makes the whole thing feel richer.
It really does. And if you think about the bigger picture, the gang itself is almost like a microcosm of this whole dying era, isn't it? Their internal conflicts, the shifting loyalties, those philosophical clashes you see between Dutch, Hosea, Arthur, and the betrayals that inevitably come. It all mirrors the larger societal changes happening outside their camp. This careful character work, it just makes their eventual breakdown as the world closes in and their ideals start to crumble so much more impactful. It definitely raises the stakes, not just for the gang as a whole, but for you, the player, because you get so invested in their individual fates, their struggles to keep some kind of family together, and all that chaos.
Absolutely. And this group, this mix of idealists and hardened criminals, they immediately find themselves facing some serious adversaries. Their crimes inevitably put them up against powerful people like Leviticus Cornwall, this wealthy oil tycoon. He hires the Pinkerton Detective Agency, led by the absolutely relentless agent Andrew Milton and his cunning subordinate, Edgar Ross. Remember him from the first game. They also clash with rival gangs, especially Dutch's old nemesis, the brutal Colm O'Driscoll and his gang. And as if that wasn't enough, they get tangled up in this bitter feud between two old Southern families, the Greys and the Braithwaites. They even run afoul of the powerful Italian mafia boss Angelo Bronte down in San Dinis. So yeah, right from the get-go, the tension is just thick in the air and the stakes are incredibly high. It's their freedom, their lives, their whole way of being that's constantly on the line.
But what really elevates this game, I think, pushing the tension beyond just the plot, is the dynamic gameplay itself. It's not just a set of mechanics bolted onto a story. It feels like it's designed to immerse you so completely that you feel like you are actually living in this incredibly detailed world, not just, playing through missions. Rockstar actually said their goal was to make the player feel as though they're living in a world instead of playing missions and watching cutscenes. And honestly, I think they absolutely nailed it. The level of detail it's almost obsessive, isn't it? It's mind-boggling. This world isn't just some pretty background. It feels like a character itself. It reacts to you, to what you do in countless little ways, often surprising ways. Every choice, every interaction, whether it's a big story decision or just some small gameplay thing, it feels like it carries weight, like it has consequences.
Which makes you wonder, right? How does that insane level of detail, things like Arthur's hair and beard actually growing over time or needing to clean your guns so they don't jam, how does that feed into the overall tension and immersion? Because it's not just realism for the sake of realism. Rockstar uses this technique, you could almost call it situated immersion, by making you, the player, deal with the physical realities of Arthur's existence, needing to eat, sleep, stay warm, maintain gear, kind of bridges that gap between you and the character. And that makes the emotional stakes of the story feel much stronger, because you're invested in his actual day-to-day survival, not just following plot points on a map. It's really clever how they make the mundane feel so significant.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's often in those small details where the real genius lies. Like, take the horse bonding. It's not just a stat bar you fill up. You actually have to care for your horse, lead it, pet it, brush it down, feed it. And as you do that, your bond deepens and you get real gameplay benefits, better stamina, new moves, maybe it won't panic as easily. I have to admit, I got ridiculously attached to my horse, like genuinely upset when she got killed in a shootout. Way more than I expected from a game mechanic. It's subtle, but it's such a powerful immersion tool. It makes your companion feel real, and that raises the emotional stakes every time you ride out.
And that depth carries over into things like hunting, too. It's way more than just point and shoot. What weapon you use, the bullet caliber, where you hit the animal, it all affects the quality of the meat and the pelt you get. You want a perfect hide. You need a clean kill shot with the right kind of weapon. A messy kill, that pelt's damaged, worth a lot less. Plus, if you leave a carcass lying around too long, it'll actually start to rot. Its value drops. And worse, it starts attracting predators, wolves, bears, you name it. So hunting becomes this strategic little minigame, right? Full of its own small tensions. Always calculating risk versus reward.
Yeah, and the game keeps layering on these character maintenance things that deepen that feeling of a lived reality, constantly reminding you Arthur's vulnerable, that the world is harsh. You've got your basic health and stamina bars, sure, but you also have these cores underneath them that affect how fast they refill. Get too cold or too hot, those cores drain fast. So you actually have to think about wearing the right clothes for the weather. Arthur's weight even changes based on how much you eat. If you're underweight, you've got less health, but maybe more stamina. Overweight, you can take more damage, but have less stamina. You even have to bathe. Stay dirty too long, and people in town will comment on your smell. Some might even refuse to serve you. It forces you to think about these practical survival things, adding another layer of tension just to navigating the world. It really grounds all the high-stakes action in the slow burn of daily life.
That core system, it's more than just tracking health. It's a brilliant resource management layer. It means you can't just hide behind cover and magically heal after a fight. You're constantly aware of Arthur's basic needs: hunger, warmth, rest. It turns simple status bars into this dynamic survival challenge. It makes every decision about supplies and preparation feel critical. It's a design choice that adds realism, sure, but it also deeply grounds you in Arthur's day-to-day struggle. It really intensifies your curiosity about how he's possibly going to manage through all the bigger conflicts coming his way.
So, okay, beyond just surviving day to day, what does all this mean for you, the player? Well, every single choice you make, help that stranger stuck on the road, or rob the stagecoach, spare that guy in a duel, or finish him off. It's not just pressing a button, it feels like a moral choice, and the game tracks it through the honor system. This system measures how the world perceives your actions. Good deeds helping folks, obeying the law, even just greeting people politely raise your honor. Bad deeds theft, harming innocents, even neglecting your horse lower it. This game really doesn't shy away from making you confront your own ethics and the consequences, which are often uncomfortable.
And that honor system is absolutely crucial for this idea of sparking meaningful conversation. Because it's not just a simple good versus bad meter. It's really about navigating those morally gray areas, the compromises Arthur has to make, in a world that rarely offers easy options. And beyond just morality, the honor system introduces this interesting psychological tension, almost like cognitive dissonance for the player. You might want to play as a ruthless outlaw, right? But if you consistently act with low honor, the game starts reflecting that back at you. Arthur's internal thoughts might get darker, people react to him differently, maybe even his appearance changes subtly depending on where you are in the story. It forces you to ask, am I playing as Arthur, or am I guiding him according to my own moral compass? That internal conflict is where the real meaningful conversation starts for the player. And these choices have tangible effects too. High honor might get you discounts in shops, unlock unique outfits. Low honor might mean you find more cash or ammo when looting bodies, so there's a direct gameplay consequence tied to your moral path.
And while you're wrestling with your own conscience, the world itself is constantly raising the stakes with the ever-present threat of the law. The law in this game isn't just a background detail. It feels like this looming presence, always watching. Commit a crime, witnesses might see you, and they will run to tell the law. Lawmen show up, they investigate the scene. If you're identified, a bounty gets placed on your head in that state. Keep causing trouble, that bounty gets higher, and the pursuit escalates. First, it's local sheriffs, then state lawmen, then relentless bounty hunters tracking you across the map, and eventually, if things get really bad, the U.S. Marshals themselves. Every time you pull that trigger unlawfully, the game is actively building tension, reminding you, eyes are watching, consequences are coming, and that arm of the law is getting longer and more effective as time goes on.
Right, the bounty system just keeps raising the stakes with every single transgression. It really forces you to make a choice. Do you double down on being an outlaw, accept life on the run? Or do you try to escape the pressure? You can pay off your bounties at post offices or even try surrendering if you're caught unarmed, though that usually means jail time. This mechanic perfectly mirrors the gang's bigger struggle against this modernizing legal system that's basically designed to wipe them out. Just trying to escape that red wanted vicinity on the map becomes this frantic tactical challenge. It highlights the constant strategic decisions you have to make just to survive day to day. It's this constant underlying tension that reinforces that core theme. Their way of life is vanishing.
Okay, so let's talk about where the main story's tension really starts to crank up. It happens almost immediately, right after that disastrous ferry heist in Blackwater mentioned in the intro. The van der Linde gang is forced to ditch a huge pile of money and flee into the mountains, putting them instantly on the defensive. They're desperate, they're on the run, and they seem to realize, maybe Dutch especially, that this relentless march of civilization is ending their time as outlaws. So Dutch, with all his charisma, but also this growing desperation in his voice, keeps promising one last heist. Just one more big score, enough money to escape the law for good, retire somewhere peaceful. But that one last score quickly becomes this tragic, almost like a broken record refrain. It creates this immediate sense of a ticking clock, this impending doom, and it raises the stakes massively for every single person in that gang. They're running, they're desperate, and their survival seems to hang entirely on Dutch's plans, which start feeling increasingly flawed and dangerous.
And the conflict escalates so quickly in those early chapters. It's not just the law, it's rival gangs, internal friction. It's expertly woven together to build that tension and constantly raise the stakes. Their first big job after fleeing Blackwater is robbing Leviticus Cornwall's private train. Boom! That immediately brings the Pinkertons down on them, led by Milton and Ross, establishes these powerful forces working against them. Then their attempt to play those two warring southern families, the Greys and the Braithwaites, against each other for money. It backfires horribly, leads directly to that brutal ambush in Rhodes, where poor Sean Maguire gets killed. That was a real shock, wasn't it? Makes you feel the consequences directly. Shortly after that, the Braithwaites kidnap young Jack Marston. Suddenly, the stakes become incredibly personal, incredibly emotional. The urgency skyrockets. And Dutch's revenge on Angelo Bronte, the mob boss in St. Denis who is holding Jack, kidnapping him, feeding him to an alligator. That's a really chilling moment and marks this significant shift in Dutch's character. It clearly disturbs Arthur, and it plants this seed of doubt, this curiosity and concern in the player's mind about where Dutch is heading.
Yeah, that Bronte scene is unsettling. And the narrative tension just keeps ramping up, maybe reaching a peak with the whole Guarma section. Remember that? After the St. Denis bank robbery goes completely sideways, Hosea dies tragically. He was really the game's moral anchor, and John gets arrested. Dutch, Arthur, Bill, Javier, and Micah barely escape. They jump on a ship heading for Cuba, but then this massive storm hits, sinks the ship, and they wash up on this remote island, Guarma. Suddenly, they're thrust into this brutal local war between a tyrannical sugar plantation owner, Colonel Fusar, and the enslaved local workers. It feels like this total fever dream, right? So unexpected, so disorienting. It pulls Arthur and us into this entirely new, incredibly violent conflict miles away from the American West we know. It's this harsh reminder of the violent world they operate in, but it's also where you really see Dutch starting to unravel. Arthur witnesses him making these brutal, self-serving choices, completely abandoning their supposed ideals just to survive. It's horrifying for Arthur.
That Guarma segment is absolutely pivotal for Arthur's character arc, and for the game's meaningful conversation about loyalty versus morality. Seeing Dutch discard their core beliefs, seeing his paranoia spike, his chilling willingness to sacrifice anyone for his own skin, especially in that desperate, brutal setting. It causes this profound, irreversible shift in Arthur's view. It drives this huge wedge between his deep-seated loyalty to Dutch, who was like a father figure, and his own awakening conscience. The stakes for Arthur's soul become the main focus here. He's grappling with the ruthless man Dutch is becoming, questioning everything he's ever fought for. After they manage to help the revolutionaries kill Fusar, they find a way back to the U.S. and regroup with the remnants of the gang. But the Pinkertons are still right on their heels. The tension never lets up. It just intensifies as the cracks within the gang become impossible to ignore.
And this is really where the story becomes Arthur's story, isn't it? Where the emotional weight lands squarely on him. He gets diagnosed with tuberculosis, and suddenly he's forced to face his own mortality, right there, unavoidable. And it's not just a plot twist, it's this powerful catalyst for his internal change. It's another ticking clock, but this one's inside him, making every choice feel even more critical. While Arthur's grappling with this death sentence, Dutch is spiraling further into paranoia, becoming detached from reality. He starts openly doubting Arthur's loyalty, and then shockingly names the slimy Micah Bell as his new right-hand man. Arthur becomes deeply worried about Dutch's isolation, his abandonment embodiment of everything they supposedly stood for, especially after Dutch cold-bloodedly murders Leviticus Cornwall. It feels less like strategy and more like pure spite by that point. So Arthur's internal struggle fighting a fatal disease while watching his chosen family completely fall apart, it creates this incredibly meaningful character arc. The tension shifts from just external threats to this powerful, desperate internal moral battle. The stakes are literally life and death now, not just for him, but for the few people he still truly cares about protecting.
That contrast is so powerful, isn't it? Arthur's growing moral clarity, which seems fueled by his diagnosis, versus Dutch's descent into paranoia and his complete rejection of their original ideals. It creates such intense dramatic tension in the later stages. Arthur starts really reflecting on his past, the violence, the life he's led, and he genuinely tries to protect the remaining innocents in the gang, seeking some kind of personal redemption before his time runs out. He starts actively pushing John to take Abigail and Jack and just run, get away from Dutch's destructive path. He knows it's their only shot at a real life. And his acts of defiance against Dutch become more significant, especially when he decides to help the local Wapiti tribe, led by Rain's Fall and his son Eagleflies, who are being brutally oppressed by the U.S. Army. These choices really highlight Arthur's desperate fight for some kind of positive legacy amidst the gang's total decay. And because of Dutch's erratic behavior and Arthur's disillusionment, you see other gang members getting fed up and leaving. It just emphasizes how broken the group is, isolating Arthur and John even more.
And it all builds to this absolutely gripping climax, a real pressure cooker of loyalty, betrayal, and impossible choices. Dutch and Micah, they plan this one final, desperate heist robbing an army payroll train. But by now, Arthur has zero faith left in Dutch. He sees Dutch abandon him to the army during a fight, leave John for dead after the train robbery, and then just chillingly refuse to go back and rescue Abigail when she's kidnapped by the Pinkertons. Arthur and Sadie Adler go back and rescue Abigail themselves, and it's then that Agent Milton confronts them, reveals Micah has been the Pinkerton informant all along. Right before Abigail shoots Milton dead, that revelation, it's pure tension. All the suspicion suddenly becomes undeniable truth. Arthur rides back to camp, confronts Micah openly. It leads to this incredibly tense, violent standoff. Dutch, Bill, Javier, and Micah, they all definitively side against Arthur and a wounded John who's just managed to drag himself back. The whole sequence is designed to make you, the player, feel the crushing weight of every past action, every broken loyalty, every impossible choice you now have to make for Arthur. It's the ultimate test of his character, and the stakes are absolutely sky high.
Which brings us to that critical question, doesn't it? How does that final choice the game give you? Do you help John escape, or do you go back for the money hidden in the burning camp? And how does Arthur's ultimate fate, which is directly tied to your cumulative honor level throughout the game, serve as the final statement on his whole journey? If you played with high honor, Arthur dies from his injuries and his illness, but he dies watching the sunrise. It's poignant, peaceful almost, a redemptive end looking out over this beautiful, brutal world he fought through. If you played with low honor, Micah comes back and executes him, either shoots him or stabs him. It's a grim, bleak, unredemptive ending. This design is so impactful because it allows for this really meaningful conversation internally for the player about what redemption even means. Is it earned through big, heroic gestures at the end, or is it built through a lifetime of smaller, deliberate acts of kindness and sacrifice, especially in a world that offers so little mercy? It really lets you define Arthur's final legacy.
But even Arthur's tragic death isn't the absolute end of the story. The epilogue jumps us forward 8 years to 1907. And now we're following John Marston, Abigail, and a young Jack as they desperately try to build an honest life, leave the past behind. It's a really compelling continuation of those themes: redemption, the struggle against an inescapable past. John eventually buys a piece of land, Pronghorn Ranch, takes out a bank loan, and works himself to the bone trying to build a home. He gets help from Uncle, Sadie Adler, and Charles Smith, who reappear. He even proposes to Abigail when she comes back, and there's this brief, almost fragile sense of peace, of domesticity. But we, the players, especially if we played the first game, know that peace is probably short-lived in this world. The past has long shadows.
Exactly. And looking at the bigger picture, that epilogue serves as both a kind of resolution and a really tragic foreshadowing. John learns that Micah Bill is somehow still alive, leading his own gang up in the mountains. So John, Sadie, and Charles ride out to confront him. And who do they find up there with Micah? Dutch. In this incredibly tense, silent standoff, Dutch suddenly shoots Micah. A surprising moment of maybe justice, or just Dutch tying up loose ends. It feels earned, though, after everything Micah did. This allows John to finish Micah off and, crucially, find the gang's old Blackwater money stash hidden there. He uses it to pay off his ranch debts, secure his family's future, so he thinks. John marries Abigail. They settle into life on the ranch, trying to finally escape the outlaw life. But those mid-credit scenes, they explicitly show Agent Edgar Ross, now at the Bureau of Investigation, tracking John down to his ranch. It's an unmistakable setup for the events of the original Red Dead Redemption. So it's this bittersweet feeling of peace, right? Because the past isn't really buried. The stakes for John Marston are just postponed, not gone. That cycle of violence is destined to continue for him. It creates this powerful sense of fate, of inescapable danger that really sticks with you.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and unpack this from another angle, just the sheer scale and ambition behind making this game. We're talking about an 8-year development cycle, started pretty much right after the first Red Dead Redemption came out in 2010. Rockstar basically pulled in all of its studios worldwide, forming this one gigantic team of around 2,000 people to get it done. And the budget estimates, analysts put the combined development and marketing costs somewhere between $370 million and $540 million US dollars, which makes it one of the most expensive games ever created. These aren't just big numbers. They represent this enormous gamble, right? A massive creative undertaking. The stakes for Rockstar, for this game needing to be a success, must have been unbelievably high. Their reputation, that huge financial investment, all riding on this one game. It makes you curious about the challenges they must have faced internally.
Absolutely. And what's really defining about that ambition, beyond just the scale, is where that massive investment went. It wasn't just about graphics or world size, though those are impressive. It was heavily focused on authenticity and narrative depth. Rockstar apparently drew a lot of influence from real historical locations, old photographs, archival material, not just relying on movies or paintings. They wanted to create an accurate feel for the time, to ground you in this palpable sense of history. Dan Houser, who was the VP of Creativity at Rockstar then, he viewed the game as historical fiction. They chose to kind of allude to some of the harsher realities of the era, rather than depicting them explicitly or making them central plot points. This allowed them to explore themes like racism, settler colonialism, social inequality, maybe through character experiences like Charles Smith's background or the story of the Wapiti tribe, without getting bogged down in, say, historical accuracy debates that could alienate players. It was a way to broaden the game's appeal while still prompting players, hopefully, to look into the real history themselves. It enriches that historical conversation without being preachy.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a tricky balance, right? Trying to be historically resonant without feeling like a history lesson. And they clearly put enormous effort into creating that diverse cast within the Van der Linde gang itself, really digging into their individual backstories, their personal reasons for being there. That just ramps up our curiosity about who these people really are. And critically, as you mentioned, they made that deliberate choice to stick with a single protagonist, Arthur Morgan. They believed it would lead to a more personal, more focused story. More impactful, maybe. Something they felt was particularly suited to the Western genre, which often focuses on one solitary, conflicted hero.
Yeah, that decision to focus solely on Arthur, unlike Grand Theft Auto V with its multiple protagonists, was definitely a gamble. But I think it paid off hugely in making his personal journey, his redemption arc, so incredibly compelling and resonant. But this massive effort, this ambition, it wasn't without its real-world tensions. And this became a huge talking point. Right before the game launched, Dan Houser mentioned in an interview that the team had worked 100-hour weeks several times in 2018. And that comment, well, you can imagine it, blew up. It was widely interpreted as meaning intense crunch time for the entire development staff, and it kicked off this massive industry-wide conversation about working conditions in game development.
Right. That's where things got really interesting, but in a much more serious, sobering way. Those reports of 100-hour work weeks, they sparked this huge debate, put a harsh spotlight on a pretty dark side of the game industry. Now, Rockstar did clarify later. They said Houser's comment only applied to a small group of senior writers for just 3 weeks, and nobody was forced to work those hours. However, other Rockstar employees came forward pretty quickly, anonymously, and sometimes openly, reporting what they called mandatory overtime, years-long periods of crunch, often unpaid because they were on salary. It raised these really serious, fundamental questions about the human cost involved in creating these incredible, immersive worlds that we all love to get lost in. It definitely created a lot of tension within the industry itself.
And it immediately brings up that crucial question about the responsibility of creators and the sustainability of these creative industries. The whole crunch time controversy really highlighted the intense real-world stakes for the thousands of developers who pour years of their lives into these projects, often sacrificing their own health and personal lives for the sake of polishing a game. It forced this critical, meaningful conversation about labor practices in what's a very competitive, very demanding field. And the fact that later reports around April 2020 suggested significant cultural changes were happening at Rockstar, with many employees expressing cautious optimism about better working conditions, that's maybe a testament to the power of that conversation. It shows these discussions can actually lead to change, which is important.
So, okay. After all that ambition, all the development pressure, the controversies, what was the final result? What was the payoff? An absolute monster hit. Red Dead Redemption 2 wasn't just praised by critics. It got universal acclaim, like a 97 out of 100 on Metacritic. It was a commercial behemoth. Critics loved the story, the characters, the massive open world, the incredible graphics, the music, that insane level of detail. They called it things like a landmark game, a new high watermark for lifelike video game worlds, and the sales. Astonishing. It pulled in US $725 million in just its first 3 days. That made it the second biggest entertainment launch ever, behind only Rockstar's own Grand Theft Auto V. By June 2025, estimates were it had shipped over 77 million copies worldwide. That firmly puts it among the best-selling video games of all time. Plus, it won over 175 Game of the Year awards. This massive success clearly showed that players were absolutely hungry for these deep, immersive, narrative-driven experiences. It totally justified that huge investment and, frankly, raised the stakes for every other developer making open-world games.
Absolutely. Looking at the bigger picture, RDR2's performance really did raise the stakes for the whole industry. It proved that audiences will invest both time and money in experiences that prioritize meticulous detail, deep storytelling, and real emotional connection. It pushed the boundaries of what video games could achieve as an art form. However, this success also brought its own set of, let's say, contentious conversations, ones that really highlighted the inherent tension between giving players immense freedom and dealing with the ethical responsibilities that come with these hyper-realistic worlds. A really notable example was what are called the suffragette incident. A YouTuber had their channel briefly suspended for posting videos showing them killing a female suffragette NPC in the game. This sparked intense curiosity and a fierce debate online about the implications.
Right, and this leads us to a really fascinating, uncomfortable point for discussion. That incident triggered this huge debate. It shone a spotlight on a pretty ugly corner of player behavior, and it made everyone ask, okay, where does the developer's responsibility end, and where does player accountability begin in a world this open, this reactive? Some people argued that because Rockstar allowed these actions attacking this specific NPC wasn't restricted in the same way attacking, say, child NPCs was, and didn't have specific harsh repercussions beyond the general honor system, which some players just ignored, they were implicitly enabling or even condoning misogynistic behavior. YouTube eventually restored the channel, but with age restrictions on the videos. But it definitely forced a much deeper and probably necessary look at the ethics of open world design. How player freedom, pushed to extremes, can sometimes lead to really unforeseen and problematic results.
And it raises that important question about the unintended consequences of giving players so much freedom in these incredibly realistic simulations. As one scholar pointed out, this incident may be reflected a newer issue for open-world games. If you grant freedom without very specific penalties for certain actions, it can kind of promote player disinhibition, where the lines blur between what's acceptable in the game world versus the real world. The suffragette incident forced this really crucial, though difficult, conversation about misogyny, about violence in games, and about the ethical boundaries of interactive entertainment itself. It became a powerful example of how a game's design and the freedom it gives players can inadvertently spark these significant real-world societal discussions that go way beyond the game itself. It really pushed the conversation about games into new ethical territory.
And it wasn't just the in-game stuff creating tension. The real world kept intruding with its own drama and high stakes. We saw these huge legal battles flare up over leaked information, even over using historical names in the game. Like, back in 2018, this online publication, Trusted Reviews, published an article leaking a bunch of confidential game features, the first-person mode, details about a battle royale mode for Red Dead Online, all based on some leaked internal document they got. Well, Take-Two Interactive, Rockstar's parent company, came down hard. In a pretty unprecedented move, Trusted Reviews ended up settling. They agreed to donate £1 million, that's about 1.3 million US dollars, to charities chosen by Take-Two, including the American Indian College Fund. The stakes for Take-Two clearly went way beyond just game sales here. It was about protecting their intellectual property, controlling sensitive information before launch, and it set a major new precedent for media accountability regarding leaks.
Yeah, what's fascinating there is how these disputes really did set new precedents, raising the stakes considerably for everyone involved in the industry. That Trusted Reviews settlement sent a very clear, very expensive message to media outlets about the legal and financial risks of publishing leaked game info. It definitely impacted how industry journalism has had to approach confidential materials since then. And then you had the whole Pinkerton lawsuit. Securitas AB, which is the parent company of the modern Pinkerton agency, they actually issued a cease and desist notice to Take-Two. They objected to the use of the Pinkerton name and badge in the game and demanded royalties. Take-Two fired back quickly, filing a complaint arguing fair use. Their point was that the Pinkerton name is so strongly historically linked to the Wild West era, its inclusion was basically essential for historical authenticity. Eventually, Securitas backed down and withdrew their claims. But that whole case was this classic clash between historical context and modern corporate branding. It prompted a really meaningful conversation about who owns history and how it can be portrayed in fiction.
So after all this, the development, the controversies, the legal fights, what does it all mean for the game's lasting impact, its cultural footprint? Well, from internet meme culture all the way to university classrooms, Red Dead Redemption 2 has seriously dug its spurs deep into our collective awareness. It's clearly more than just entertainment. It feels like a cultural touchstone that just keeps inspiring people, keeps informing discussions. It's been referenced in shows like South Park. Lil Nas X used game footage in his massive hit Old Town Road. Music video scholars even wrote about how that video, using the game, impacted contemporary views of Western culture. Even other game developers took inspiration. The producer of The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, Eiji Onuma, specifically cited Red Dead Redemption 2 as a direct influence on how they approached their own open-world design. That shows its impact right on the craft of game making.
And that brings up another important question about the role immersive media like this can play in education and cultural understanding. The game's incredibly detailed world has actually become a subject for academic study, sparking real curiosity in researchers. For instance, a study back in 2021 from the University of Exeter found that people who played Red Dead Redemption 2 actually showed an increased understanding of ecology and animal behavior. They could identify more real-world animals on average than other gamers, which is a real testament to the game's incredible environmental detail. And maybe most remarkably, there's a history professor at the University of Tennessee, Tor Olson, who teaches a whole course called Red Dead America. He uses the game as a primary text to explore U.S. history in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Wow, that's amazing. A university history course using a video game as a core text. How does he actually use the game in class? That definitely sounds like it creates a meaningful conversation about history.
Well, he leverages all that meticulous detail, not just as scenery, but as a dynamic teaching tool. Students might analyze the social structure and economy of St. Denis in the game to understand Gilded Age industrialization, class divides, things like that. Or they examine how characters like Rains Fall and Eagle Flies are depicted to discuss settler colonialism and Native American resistance. They can study the portrayal of Jim Crow laws in the South, the burgeoning women's suffrage movement, the whole myth of the closing frontier, all directly through the game's story, its environments, its random encounters. The interactive nature of it apparently transforms passive learning into something much more active and engaging. It helps make these complex historical concepts feel more visceral, more understandable, in a way that maybe traditional textbooks sometimes can't. He even published a book based on the course, and get this, the audiobook version is narrated by Roger Clark, the actor who played Arthur Morgan. That just perfectly cements its unique blend of academic interest and cultural resonance. It undeniably shows how a really carefully crafted fictional world can be a powerful launchpad for exploring complex history and sparking genuinely meaningful conversations about our past.
Wow. So from the absolutely breathtaking scope of its open world to the incredibly personal, often heartbreaking journey of Arthur Morgan, and all the complex real-world ripples it created in the industry, in culture, even in academia, Red Dead Redemption 2 really does stand as this monumental achievement in interactive storytelling. It completely captivated us, it challenged us, it built this undeniable tension from start to finish, and it truly made us feel like we were part of that vanishing tumultuous era.
And if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, Red Dead Redemption 2 isn't just a story about some outlaws fighting a losing battle against oncoming civilization. It really asks us to think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In a world where systems, where progress seem relentless and designed to eventually catch up to everyone, what does true freedom actually look like? And maybe more importantly, what are we really willing to sacrifice to achieve it? For ourselves and maybe for the people we care about.
Yeah. And as the credits roll on our deep dive today, maybe we're left with this question for you, the listener. If you found yourself caught like Arthur, between an inescapable past breathing down your neck and this uncertain future stretching out ahead, burdened by loyalties but desperately yearning for some kind of redemption. What choices would you make, and what kind of legacy would you fight to leave behind in a world that seems determined to forget you ever existed?